A monstrous figure, wide-eyed and blood-soaked, devours a limp body, not on a gallery canvas, but on a dining room wall. This is Francisco Goya, one of Spain's most celebrated painters, spiraling into madness. What drove Goya to turn his private sanctuary into a gallery of nightmares? Francisco Goya began his career as a spirited young artist in late 18th century Spain, yet he is remembered today for some of art history's most haunting images. The black paintings were created late in his life, covering the interior walls of his private residence. These grim and surreal images were never meant for public view. So what path led Goya to paint such disturbing visions in the solitude of his own home? Born in Fuendetodos, Spain, Francisco Goya came from a middle-class family. He was educated at a monastic school where he was encouraged to seek knowledge independently. Goya taught himself to paint and later studied in Zaragoza under José Luzán, a Spanish Baroque painter. He then moved to Madrid and studied with Francisco Bayeu, whose style leaned more towards neoclassicism. Goya went on to marry Bayeu's sister, Josefa, affectionately known as Pepa. With support from his brother-in-law and teacher, Goya secured a position designing cheerful, cartoon-like scenes for royal tapestries. Images filled with pastel tones and light-hearted charm, reminiscent of Rococo art. These commissions opened doors to the Royal Academy, and soon Goya was painting portraits for the Spanish royal family. Although some of these portraits were unflattering, possibly intentionally so, his distinctive style became fashionable at court. Goya had risen to fame, wealth, and status. In 1792, Goya fell seriously ill. While the cause remains uncertain, lead poisoning is one theory. Though he gradually recovered, the illness left him permanently deaf. For a man who loved music and conversation, the silence was devastating. At the age of 46, Goya, adjusting to a world without sound, turned inward, pouring his emotions into his work. In one painting, he filled a courtyard with writhing lunatics. Some fought invisible foes, others crouched or rolled on the ground, their faces contorted in agony. A guard stood at the center, beating two grappling men. These unsettling images reflected Goya's fears about his own physical health and mental state. Goya had visited asylums in his youth and, as a believer in Enlightenment ideals, found the contemporary treatment of the mentally ill to be cruel and senseless. In this painting, sunlight glows above yet fails to touch the chaos below, a disturbing contrast between light and inner darkness. As time passed, Goya's disillusionment with society deepened. His print series, Los Caprichos, consisted of 80 symbolic and surreal critiques of Spanish life. Goya was increasingly finding that his Enlightenment beliefs clashed with the ignorance he witnessed all around him. The Los Caprichos prints depict women tormented by monsters, whispering gossip, flying demons, and donkeys masquerading as scholars. One of the most famous images, The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, shows a man slumped over his desk as owls, bats, and other shadowy creatures swirl above him. Reason has fallen asleep, and the monsters of superstition and ignorance have emerged. Through grotesque imagery, Goya mocked vices like vanity, irrationality, and superstition. Some historians believe that perhaps Goya thought a return to reason could help improve societal decay and restrain humanity's darker impulses. However, the other prints in the Los Caprichos series suggest that he saw little hope of that ever actually happening. In 1808, Spain was thrown into chaos. Napoleon Bonaparte broke a treaty and invaded, starting the Peninsular War. Initially, Goya may have perceived French influence as a positive push toward modernization, but Goya's optimism quickly vanished when Napoleon's brother Joseph took the Spanish throne. After a rebellion in Madrid, Joseph's forces responded with brutal executions. Goya witnessed the massacre firsthand. The war dragged on, and Spanish fighters resorted to guerrilla tactics. When Napoleon finally fell, King Ferdinand reclaimed the Spanish throne. Goya, once sympathetic to the French cause, was now under scrutiny, but he managed to avoid punishment. Instead, he was commissioned to commemorate the fallen. He responded with two of art history's most poignant and powerful paintings, 2nd of May, 1808 and 3rd of May, 1808. In 2nd of May, chaos erupts in the streets as people resist. In 3rd of May, French soldiers execute prisoners. A man stands illuminated, arms outstretched in surrender, or perhaps defiance. To his side, bodies lie in a heap. More men await their turn. The line of faceless soldiers, guns drawn, forms an assembly line of death. Goya's story only grows darker from here. If stories like this captivate you, subscribing to The Collector is the best way to stay immersed in the minds of art history's darkest works. By now, Goya had all but retreated from public life. Political tensions were rising yet again, and this time the liberals were under threat. Goya moved to a quiet home outside Madrid called the Quinta del Sordo, House of the Deaf Man. Of course, Goya himself was deaf, but the name of the house actually predated him. There, isolated and aging, Goya created his most disturbing works yet, the black paintings. He painted 14 images directly onto the walls of his house, not for any particular patrons or even the public, but just for himself. These paintings emerged from a life filled with trauma, illness, war, heartbreak, political suppression. They reveal an artist unraveling. When the black paintings were finally discovered, years after Goya's death, they offered a raw, unfiltered view into the artist's mind. Each of the black paintings carries its own sense of unease. In The Drowning Dog, a small animal's head barely rises above a sweeping wall of muddy pigment, its body submerged and its fate uncertain. Witch's Sabbath shows a monstrous goat looming over a huddle of women, their faces distorted with awe and terror. In Two Old Ones Eating Soup, skeletal figures peer from beneath heavy brows, slurping from bowls in haunting silence. Together, they depict a descent, not just into personal madness, but into a collective nightmare. Although Goya had trained in the traditional technique of fresco painting, the black paintings were created with oil paint applied directly onto dry plaster. They were never meant to last. Why decorate one's home with such horrors? We can't be certain, but some things seem clear to us now. Goya had endured illness, violence, and disillusionment throughout his life. These paintings may have been his way of releasing or confronting these traumas. Some historians speculate that lead poisoning may have affected Goya's nervous system, distorting his perceptions. Political repression only added to his mounting fear and bitterness. Take Saturn devouring his child, perhaps the most famous and chilling of all the black paintings. A wide-eyed father sinks his teeth into his son's body. Blood streams from a headless neck. The son's limp form suggests not a child, but an adult, aware of his horrific predicament, but helpless all the same. This was an ancient myth transformed into modern-day madness, an allegory of fear and control, and of raw, unspeakable pain. The black paintings weren't just cathartic. They were Goya's ultimate act of artistic freedom. Earlier in life, Goya had written that artists needed liberty to create, that rigid institutions, such as the Royal Academy, stifled true talent. Goya believed in painting not as a mechanical skill, but as an emotional, expressive art. Academies should not be restrictive, he wrote. He rejected compulsory rules, geometric perfection, and systems that turned painting into what he described as something mean, base, and effeminate. The black paintings were Goya's manifesto, immortalized not by words, but in fleeting, frightening images. Goya only spent 3 years living in the Quinta del Sordo before he fled Spain altogether. The political climate had finally grown too oppressive. He spent his final years in France, where he died in 1828. The black paintings, once hidden in Francisco Goya's home, now hang in Madrid's Museo del Prado. They remain a haunting glimpse into the tortured brilliance of a man who painted not what he saw, but what he feared, what he remembered, and what he felt he could not escape.